Good morning, everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Good morning, Tov. Good morning.
Okay, I'll just
Boker
be one more.
Tov, Kodesh Tov.
Go to the show. Hold on, I'll be just 2 more minutes. I'll be right with you.
No rush.
Okay. So today we are on 64a, second line from the top, the Mishnah. We have been discussing nemonis, or what's a good word? Believability. In what cases can a person make a statement that carries halachic weight in the court or in a halachic matter? So Kidashi is BT. The person says, I gave away my daughter in marriage while she was a minor, right? The father has rights to marry off his daughter when she's a minor. Or or he says, I married her off and then I accepted a divorce on her behalf. Okay, and if she is still, at the time he made the statement, she is still a minor, then Naman, he's believed. Gemara will discuss why, but basically the idea is that since she's still a minor, he could still do what he said, right? He could still marry her off. So there's no problem with believing that he said he's already done it before, because if he wanted that to be her status, then he could just marry her off. And Gemara will discuss some of the details. Now, if he says, I married her off and then accepted her divorce while she was a minor, but now she's no longer a minor, she's an adult, then it has no validity. And by the way, and the Gemara will discuss it also, what are the consequences? The consequences are things like, can she marry a Kohen? Because someone who's divorced can't marry a Kohen, right? So it matters if we believe that he had married her off and divorced. Nish besu. Similarly, if someone says, my daughter was taken captive and I redeemed her, this is a very painful thing to read right now, but it has the same effect. A woman who has been taken captive, and one assumes or can assume that she was raped, then she is likewise unable to marry a Kohen. Then it doesn't matter if she is still a minor or an adult, then he's not believed. And here, clearly, as the Gemara will discuss, the difference, one of the differences is that you can marry off your daughter, and I can give you the authority to say I already did, but it's not like you can have her taken captive, right? That's not within your power. So therefore, if you say that, you have no leg to stand on, as a word. What's the word for nemonis in English? Drive me crazy. You have no standing, I guess. Okay. So Mar says, first of all, why do we have to work with both cases? And also, like, why the difference? Yeah, why the difference between claiming that you married her and accepted her divorce, or claiming that she was captive and redeemed? So Reisha biyade. So as I said, the case of marrying her off, that you can do, you're free to do. Safe Allah biyade, but having her taken captive is not within your power. So therefore, you have no particular standing or believability. Below, the Gemara says, is that really what it's about? you can like is it really not in your power to give her the status of a woman who has been captive and ransomed? And as I said, that captive, that status is she can't marry a Kohen, right? But you could, in another way, make her invalid to marry a Kohen. You could have her, you could marry her off to someone who is a halal. A halal is a Kohen who if a Kohen marries someone who he is not permitted to marry, then the offspring, the son particularly, is not a valid Kohen. And if you marry a woman who marries a halal, or even a woman who marries a halal, kapas lemikuhuna, then that makes her unfit to marry a Kohen. Right, so he could give her, by this kind of marriage, he could give her the same status as if she had been captive. So it is in his hands to affect her status that way. So why don't we say that, let him be believed when she said she was captive. Holocaust. Where it says that's not a problem. Rabbi Disai ben Yehuda Diamar. This is according, our mission is according to Rabbi Yehuda Disai Diamar, who says, Benos Yisrael mikvah tahara l'chalalin. No, he disagrees. He says, just as a Tame person cannot make a mikvah on Tame, right? A mikvah is like the source of Tahara, and it can't be made Tame by coming into contact with something Tame. So too, that a girl, a woman with proper yichus cannot be made forbidden by marrying a halal, right? The status of the halal does not affect her. So he disagrees with what we said before, and therefore our Tana could hold that way. Okay, so the father can't use that strategy to make her unfit to marry a Kohen. So Gemara says, well, there's another way. What if he marries her to a mamzer, right? Certainly a woman who marries a mamzer has that same status as someone who was captive. Rabbi Akiva, no, we'll say it's like Rabbi Akiva. Diamar, ein Kiddushin tofsin b'chai ve'lavi. That wouldn't even work because you're not allowed to marry a mamzer. So generally, we hold that that if there's an Isur Kares, right? Like to marry, if you try to marry your mother or your sister, which is a serious a Kares violation, so then the marriage is meaningless. It doesn't take effect, right? But if there's just a simple lotase, a simple commandment not to marry, for example, a mamzer, so if you do marry a mamzer, that's still considered a marriage. It's just that you violated something, and statuses can change and so on. But the Kiddushin Tofsin, the marriage is a valid marriage. But Rabbi Akiva says, "Ain't Kiddushin Tofsin b'chai ve'lavi." Rabbi Akiva says, no, it doesn't even work, right? So you can't say that the father could marry her to a mamzer in order to affect this change in her status, because such a marriage wouldn't even work. So Gemara says, "Hare biyado lasi almana l'kohen gadol." What about marrying her as let's say in the case where this poor girl had already been widowed, so then she's forbidden to marry a kohen gadol. But in that case, even Rabbi Akiva agrees that almana l'kohen gadol, that is a Kiddushin, even though it's a forbidden Kiddushin, generally we would say it doesn't even work. In that case, Rabbi Akiva would say it works. So maybe our Mishnah is talking about the case where the girl was widowed already, and he marries her to the Kohen. The father marries her to the Kohen. Could marry her to a Kohen Gadol, and thereby affect her change in status, just like a shivuya, just like a captive. And how do we know that Rabbi Akiva makes that exception for Alman Kohen Gadol? Rabbi Simai. Rabbi Simai said, "The Tanya, Rabbi Simai Omer mina kol os Rabbi Akiva mamzer." A child born from any forbidden marriage, Rabbi Akiva says, is a mamzer. Chutz mi Alman Kohen Gadol, except for a widow marrying a Kohen Gadol. Sharei Amar Torah, because the Torah makes an exception by saying lo yikach v'lo yichalel. The Torah says, when it says that a Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow, it says he shouldn't take her and thereby not profane his family, his children, not make his children halalim. So chilulim oseh. In other words, that if he this implies that by doing this, by making this marriage, the Kohen Gadol would be actually making his children chalalim. So it reverts to the general opinion, which is that you can make these marriages do work and they make a halal. They know some mamzerim, and it doesn't make them mamzerim. So according to Rabbi Akiva, this is a marriage that the father could affect. Again, if the poor child had already been widowed, this is a marriage that the father could effect in order to change the status of the child, just like she would be if she were a captive. Therefore, we believe him to say that he's a captive, and that so why would we not believe her? Why does our Mishnah say that she was not that he's not believed? So more answers, Rabbi Yesheva, because the ton of our Mishnahs has a different view of Rabbi Akiva. Diamar bo v'nitzvah hal Akiva ben Yosef. Let's protest. He said, let's protest what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Shayomar kol she'en lo bia b'Yisrael havlad mamzer. Who says that anyone who's not permitted to marry a particular woman, if they do have a child, then that child's mamzer. Let's protest against that. One second. So according to this, Rabbi Akiva holds that the Kiddushin does not take effect between the Kohen Gadol and the window. Therefore, we could say our Mishnah says that the father is not believed because the father cannot affect. In other words, he denies this exception that we attribute to Rabbi Akiva, and the father cannot affect the change of status on the girl to the same as if she were a captive. Therefore, he's not believed to say that she was a captive. Okay, so Hanichol Rabbi Yesheva Ilotami Denafshe Shapir. So, okay, this is okay according to Rabbi Yesheva if he had another way to explain Rabbi Akiva, right? Or if he had a different view of Rabbi Akiva, but what if? So we're interpreting Rabbi Yesheva as protesting against this exception that Rabbi Akiva stated, but maybe he's coming to reject Rabbi Akiva altogether, which actually would make more sense, right? Like, no, I don't accept what Rabbi Akiva is saying, is what he's saying. So, maybe he's saying that that the father does have the power to marry off his daughter to someone that's prohibited through a regular mitzvah. Okay, so then the father does have that power. So then why is he not believed, right? So Rabbi Ashi says you're barking up the wrong tree altogether. The problem with the Mishnah, or the reasoning of the Mishnah, is not a question of, since he could affect the change, therefore we believe him to affect it in a different way. No. Here's the problem. Okay, he can marry off his daughter, but can he force her? Is he in charge of her divorcing? Right? In other words, look at the other case of the Mishnah, right? We said that the father can marry off the child. Okay, or is believed to say that he's married off the child. We also said that he's believed to marry her, to say that she was married and divorced. But it's not within his power to divorce her, right? So how can you say? So it's not a question of this ne'emanus is not because he could do it, because he can't do it, right? Sure, he can accept the divorce on her behalf, but who's really doing the divorce? It's the husband, right? So it's not within his power. And also iluha amar haidalanicha begava. If the like you're saying that he can marry her off, but there's somebody else that has to consent. The husband has to consent here, right? Like you can't force somebody to marry this girl. So your original idea is that since the father could marry her off, but it's not only the father, he has to find someone that's willing to marry her, right? So what is the reasoning for our Mishnah? What does Rav Ashi say? The first part of the Mishnah with the question of marrying, that is believed about that he married off the daughter. So the Torah believes him. Like the Torah says, he's believed. how so? As Rav Huna said, Yamar Rav Huna Marav, Minayin Liav Shenem and Lasar as Bito Min Torah. Where's the proof from the Torah that a father is believed when he says that he's married off his daughter and thereby she is forbidden to marry somebody else? Shenamar as Biti Nasati Lishazeh. This is the case of a father who protests. No, when the husband claims that the bride is not a virgin, and so the father says the Torah says, so the father comes to the court and he says, I gave my daughter to this man, and he etc. But in the process of describing the case, the Torah says, the father says, I married her off to this man, Le'ish Asar. So he gave her to this man. It is accepted that he has forbidden her to everybody else. Hazeh hitira. So in other words, the father is saying he's believed to say that the woman is married, and to this person. So basically, from the statement, from this description of the Torah, we understand that the father is believed about this. That's why we believe. And so, with regards to marriage, the ideas of marriage, we believe the father. But where do you get that the father would be believed about captivity? There, he has no extra standing. He's like anybody else. One person who says that so and so has been taken captive, that's not valid testimony. Like everything else, you need two witnesses. And so the father has no extra standing the way he does with Kiddushin. In other words, all the discussion we had about Biyado, that it's up to him, it is within the father's power, blah, blah, blah. We reject all that. And it's just simply a question of the Torah gave the father Nemanus believability when it comes to marriage, but not as a single witness regard to anything else. Next mission. Misham or B'shas Misaso, Yeshli Banim. So here we're dealing with the idea of a Yibum, right? A man dies without sons, and he's married and has no sons and has a brother, or at least one brother. Then the brother has to take the sister-in-law in levirate marriage. But if you have no sons or you have no brothers, it doesn't apply. Okay, so someone who says on his deathbed, guess what? I never mentioned this before, but I have children. Okay, if like even from another wife, I think, right? But he says, I never mentioned this before, but guess what? I have children, and therefore, when I die, there's no levirate marriage. And now we believe him. Yeshli Achim, but if he says, you know what? I never told you before, but I have brothers, right? We thought you had no brothers, so there's no levirate marriage. But he reveals, I have brothers, then there is levirate marriage. Okay, and of course, the consequence to whether there is or not is that the widow can't marry. If there's no levirate marriage, she can marry anybody else upon the death of the husband. If there is the requirement for levirate marriage for Yibum, then she can't marry anybody else, right? So when he says, I have brothers, he makes her forbidden. So Alma Neman Lahatir. So Gemara says, okay, let's figure this Mishnah out. So we see that the Mishnah is saying that you can free your wife by saying, I have children, right? And we are believed, but you can't forbid your wife to anybody else by saying, I have brothers, and therefore you have to marry my brother only, and not somebody else. In them and lesser. So name of Masnis is low Rav Nassan. So maybe this conflicts with Rav Nassan, the Tanya of a Brisa. Similar case, but a little bit different. First, he had actually claimed originally that he says, I have children, right, with someone else. And then, we get married, but then there's no levirate marriage. B'shas Misam or Elibine. But when on his deathbed, he's saying, you know what, I was lying. I never had any children. Guess what? You're on the hook for Yibum when I die. Or B'shas Kedusha Amar Ein Liachim, or the parallel case, when he got married, he says, or he's always said, I have no brothers. And then B'shas Misa on his deathbed, Amar Yesh Liachim, he says, guess what? I was lying. I have a brother. And so you are on the hook for levirate marriage. Neman Lahatir. So he's believed to make her a mutar ve'ein. In other words, he's believed when he says, oh, I was kidding about the kids. I actually don't have any children, so you're permitted to marry anyone. So he's believed, but but he's not believed to say, oh, guess what? I do have brothers. You're not permitted to marry anybody else. Divri Rebbe. That's what Rabbi says. Rabbi Nassan Omar, Afnem and Lesser. Rabbi Nassan says no, he's believed in either case. He's believed even in when he says, I have brothers and therefore you're forbidden to marry anyone else. So that's contradicting to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah makes a distinction between the claim that you have sons or the claim that you have brothers, right? And says you're believed in one but not the other. But Rav Nassan says you are believed in both cases. Rava says no. You can't prove that. You can't say that Rav Nassan disagrees with our Mishnah. What's the difference? Shani Hasam came to b'shas misa kahadarbe. In the case of our brisa, you're contradicting what you said before. In the case of our Mishnah, you never said anything. You let us assume that you had no right. You made no statement before. So now you're revealing something that you never denied, that you have never revealed, but you never said anything contradictory. In the case of the Brisa, you are contradicting what you said before. So Kevin the B'Shas Misa Kam Hadarbe at the time. So when in the Brisa with Rav Nassan, when at the time on his deathbed, the husband is retracting what he said, Ema Kushta Kamar. So we can say, okay, he must be telling the truth. But in the case of the Mishnah, like this is a little. I guess it's a little strange, but I guess the idea is it's like a deathbed confession, right? Like this has been weighing on me the whole time we've been married. I lied to you in the first place, and now I'm finally going to confess on my deathbed, right? Whereas in the case of the when you never had said anything before, and now you're making a statement, or maybe we're assuming that you're just trying to manipulate the situation of the wife, whether for good or for bad. Amalei Abaye, Abaye says, "Love kol decheinu." On the contrary, like, why don't you take the opposite approach, that we should believe him more when he's not contradicting himself? When he's contradicting himself, we shouldn't believe him. So, Hashta, in other words, how would this go? Umahasam, in the case in the Brisa of Rav Nassan, the Kamera Leila Dibure, where he is contradicting what he said before. Amar Kushna Kamar, you're saying then he's telling the truth. Masnisin Delo Kamara Leila Dibure Lakoshke. Like he is, in the case where he's contradicting what he said before, he puts himself in a bad light, right? He's saying I was lying, right? Whereas in the case in our Mishnah where he never said anything before, he never said anything before, but he's not setting himself up as a liar. So what does Abai say? Our Mishnah is talking about where we didn't have any presumption, right? There was no chazaka, right? And we had no presumption about whether you had children. Since there's no chazaka, no presumption beforehand, so that's why, in order to make her permitted, we believe him, but for when the claim about brothers, where he says she has to do yibum and is fruit, and anybody else love we don't believe him. Like, he can't change the wife's status that she can not marry anybody else. Right now, note that we're not saying like, here is my brother, you have to marry her. Right? We're talking about a case where he says, somewhere in the world I have a brother. Good luck finding him. In the meantime, you can't marry anybody else. So we don't believe him as a single person, single witness, to say that my widow is going to be forbidden from marrying anybody else. But in the case of children, like, we had no reason to believe that she was us. But in the case of the Rav Nassan's Brisa, the Musal and Bache, we always that's talking about a case where we thought he had brothers, like we knew that he had brothers, but we thought he had no children. So then we could say, like, why would he be lying, right? My comma, what do we say? We're trying. If you're saying he's trying to make her off the hook from Yibum, then he has the ability to do that. Let him give her a divorce, right, on his deathbed. A divorced woman is not subject to Yibum. Okay, so according to Abai, both Rabbi and Rav Nassan agree to that, but what's the dispute between Rabbi and Rav Nassan and the price? So Rabbi says, Rabbi says this like, why should I lie? I could affect it in an honest way. That is just as valid as the testimony of two witnesses. Yasu Edom Akri Chazaka. So two witnesses, if you have a chazaka about something, but then two witnesses tell you were wrong, and the two witnesses have a higher level of believability. So similarly, Rabbi says that the idea of Mali L'Shaker, that I could affect this without lying, is also so believable that it uproots a chazaka. But Rav Nassan Savar Mali L'Shaker Ki Chazaka Dami. Rav Nassan says no, it's not stronger. It has the same weight as a chazaka. Lo asi chazaka v'yakra lechazaka legamrei. You can't use one chazaka like two things of equal weight. The first one, we stay with the presumption of the first impression that we had. So therefore, the husband's original claim doesn't have such credibility, and that's the word I was looking for, credibility. It just weakens the presumption that she should be that she is subject to Yibum. So, and when on his deathbed, the husband is merely confirming the original chazaka, and that's why he's believed. It's not really that he's believed; it's just the original chazaka stands in place. Okay.
You know someone who discovered on her mother's deathbed that she had a sister she didn't know about. It wouldn't affect this, obviously, but this actually can happen, this kind of situation.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear about this more and more with like DNA databases and so on. And people have a heightened ability to find previously unknown family members.
Sperm donorship is a big cause of this.
I'm sorry, what is?
Sperm donors.
Oh, sperm, sure. Yes, of course. Right.
Yeah, it's not just a subject for trash TV. It's real.
Of course, yeah. Okay, next Mishnah, we're getting into a little bit different area, and this has to do with cases of what did the father really mean. So it's accepted that the father can marry off his minor daughter, but let's check out these cases. So let's say a man, this is not talking about Nemonis anymore, it's talking about when the father affects a marriage on behalf of his daughter, for his daughter. So so if a man says, I'm marrying you, my daughter, marrying my daughter off to you, it doesn't apply to an adult daughter. It would only apply to a minor daughter. That's fairly obvious. I think that's just setting the stage here. What if you have two pairs of daughters from two different mothers, right? Two wives. And he says, Kidashi is biti agdala. I've married off my older daughter. So I'm not sure what word to use exactly. Yeah, older daughter, I guess is right. But what do you mean? Do you mean the older one altogether? Could mean the older one of the second group. Let's say the daughters from wife number 2 are both younger than the daughters from wife number 1. So maybe the older one refers to the oldest in the second pair. So I don't know if it means the oldest one of the first pair. So the older one of the second pair. Or you could even mean the younger daughter of the first pair because she's still older than both the daughters of the second pair. Which that seems a little far-fetched, but basically we don't know which one he is married off. Kulan asuros. None of them can marry anybody else. In other words, we have to assume that maybe it's any of these daughters might be the one that was married off and can't marry anyone else. So without as a consequence, except the youngest of the youngest pair, there's no way we could interpret his words to mean that he married her off. She's the youngest of the youngest. So when he said I married the older one, it can't be her. So 3 of them are forbidden to marry anyone else, and the youngest of the youngest is the very youngest is off the hook. Now, let's see. Kulam Asuros. Yeah. Chutz min hakadashos, right. Divur Rameir. This is what Rameir says. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kulam Mutaros, Chutz min hakdolos shabagdolos. Rabbi Yossi says, don't be silly. When he says the oldest daughter, it means the oldest, the absolute oldest, the oldest of the older pair. She's the one. Now, a parallel case, Kiddushin b'tiach tana. What if you say same idea, right? You've got the same family situation. You say I'm marrying off my younger daughter, right? Any of them ketana shabbatana. I don't know if he means the youngest of the second pair, or ketana shabbatdolos, or the youngest of the first pair, or gedolos shabbatana sheketana min ketana shabbatdolos, or the older of the second pair who's still younger than the ones in the first pair. Kul nasuros, and all then similarly, they're all forbidden, except for the very oldest one. There's no way in which this could be referring to her as a younger daughter, because she's older than everybody else. No, younger means the youngest, and there's only that one that it applies to. So first of all, the Gemara says, hakatanos bichlal. So the first case of the Mishnah, which I described as the setup, was if you marry off your daughter, if you say I married off my daughter, it can only apply to the minor daughters, not any adult daughters. Shemas mina haktanos bichlal. So that implies that the daughters who are minors are like, it could be referring to any of them, right? If there's more than one minor daughter, and you said I married off my minor daughter, right? Then it could be any of them. If you haven't specified. Shmas mina, Kiddushin shein misrin would be a have a Kiddushin. Now, if there is a doubt, like if let's say you're the guy who was married to one of these others, but you don't know which one the father gave you, then you couldn't sleep with any of them, because if you pick the wrong one, she's a sister of your wife, and you're forbidden from sleeping with her, right? So does that mean, so in such a case, do we call that a Kiddushin? Like if this is a case where you married somebody, but you're forbidden to sleep with her, right? Due to this issue of doubt. So does that mean the Kiddushin works? No, that case of the Mishnah is, we're not talking about groups. We're talking about the guy has one adult daughter and one minor daughter. He says, I married off the minor daughter, so she's married. It's, as I said, it's just a setup for the rest of it. But wait, the Mishnah says that it used the plural, bogros, right? What does it say? In habogros bichlal, right? The adult daughters are not included in, or they're not subject to this. That's an easy one. My bogros dielma means adult daughters in general, right? So pshita, in that case, it's obvious. Bogros might be the tayu, like, we know already that you don't have the power to marry off your adult daughter. Where we're talking about, the Mishnah is talking about where the adult daughter said to the father, I'm making you an agent to accept the marriage proposal for me, right? So now the father has the right to accept the marriage for the adult daughter. But when he says, I married off my daughter, we understand that to mean not that he fulfilled this agency, but that he married off the one that he had a right to marry. When he marries off a daughter, you might think that he might be fulfilling the request of the adult daughter to act as his agent. Kamash Malan, because why do we assume that it was the minor daughter he's marrying off? Because he gets paid for it, right? Why do people marry off their married daughters? For the dowry, right? Not dowry, but because the whole point behind this was to get some money out of the deal. So we assume that since there's a profit motive, that's the one that he means to marry. But the Gemara says, well, if the adult daughter is appointing him as an agent, why don't we also assume that he's saying, and you get to keep the money, right? So then there is a profit motive for him and to marry off the adult daughter. So of course, there's a few mitzvah de Rami Alei. We have a mitzvah de Rami Alei. We actually see this as a positive thing that that the father has a mitzvah to marry off the daughters, not specifically, maybe not specifically the minor daughters, but since he feels that he would be fulfilling this mitzvah to marry off a daughter, somehow that is understood as preferable to acting as the agent for the adult daughter, in which case he's not really marrying her off, he's just enabling her to marry herself off. So it's a bit of a fine line, but okay. Now, next part of the Mishnah, which has to do with the two groups of daughters. We have to do both cases. We have to explain both the case where he says, I married the older daughter or I married off the younger daughter. If we'd only said the older daughter case, that's why Reb Meir says, makes his ruling, because it's only because there is a younger daughter that, we call the older one the older one. But in the case where he gave away the younger daughter, maybe he would agree with Rabbi Yossi, that it's like, who's he going to call the baby? That would be only the youngest. Only the youngest of the youngest is going to be called the baby. But in the case of an older, it's like, we always say, you're such a big girl, right? So maybe by saying the oldest, it's ambiguous. The older, it's ambiguous who he means, but when he says the younger, he means the youngest, right? So you would think that's why the Mishnah has to specify the parallel case of when he says the younger. The Marbaha, and the reverse, why don't we just talk about the younger case, the case of stating I married the younger one. Baha Dukam Rabbi Yossi, that's why where Rabbi Yossi makes his ruling. We would say he agrees to Rabbi Meir because basically the mirror case, right? That like who are you going to call the older one? Maybe it is one has this kind of cultural standard to refer to women as young women, right? So he would only say the older one in the case of the very oldest one. So it tells you that it's the older and the younger cases are parallel. Maybe the dispute between Rav Meir and Rav Yossi is, would a person, put himself in the situation by not being specific? Or Meir says, yeah, people do that, right? And therefore we have to worry about which one he really meant. But Rabbi Yossi says, no, people wouldn't do that. If they're saying something, they mean a specific thing because it would have negative consequences otherwise. But we have an opposite. We can show the opposite. Now we have a Mishnah, and this is a completely different thing. Another al haPesach. A person makes a neder, and he says, "I'm not going to do something. I forswear benefit from something or somebody until Pesach." So then you're forbidden. That vow applies until Pesach starts. Ad she'yehei Pesach. But if he says until it is Pesach, it's hard to translate these because they're idiomatic, right? But until I'm just going to use the Gemara's phrase, Ad she'yehei Pesach, Asur ad she'yehei, that means until Pesach ends, right? Ad Pnei Pesach, but until, I would translate this maybe as until Pesach time. Does that mean before or after? So that's ambiguous, is what we're assuming. Reb Meir Omer Asur ad she'yagia. Then we resolve that ambiguity by saying until Pesach starts. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ad she'yetzer. Rabbi Yossi says no, it means until Pesach ends, right? So that's the opposite of what they said in the Mishnah. If you're looking at it in terms of that, will people, place themselves in an ambiguous situation or not? You know what? You're right. The Mishnah from the Darim is actually incorrect. It's reversed. We actually have to assign what we attributed to Rabbi Yossi to Rabbi Meir and vice versa, and that way it aligns with our Mishnah here. But the Gemara says, but how can you do that? Zaklal, kol shezmano kavua v'amar ad panei. The Mishnah continues there, or there's another brayso that says, here's the rule: anything that has a set time, and he said until that time, ad panei, use that idiom ad panei. So like, don't switch it, because this brayso accords with our original version of the Mishnah in the Darim. One second. No, I got that wrong. Oh yeah. This supports. I'm sorry. This supports our switching of the version of the Mishnah of the Darim, and therefore everything aligns, everything accords. Rameir and Rav Yossi have the same position across the board regarding and will people place themselves in ambiguous situations. Amar Abaye. Abaye says machlokas b'shnei kitei banos. This dispute between Rameir and Rav Yossi is only, as the Mishnah described, in when there's two groups of daughters, aval b'kas achas. But if there's only one wife and one source of the daughters, divrei kol gedola mamash katana mamash. When you say the older one, you mean the oldest. When you say the younger one, you mean the youngest, according to everybody. And so and the middle one, you'd say Rachel. She doesn't have a designation of older or younger. She has a name. You use her name. And he says both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir would agree to this. Okay, what if there were, the second group had three daughters, right? Then the middle one should be like, she's not part of the uncertainty because she has a name. Use her name, right? She's not the older in any sense, and she's not the younger in any sense. Gemara says, yeah, that's what the Mishnah was talking about. That was what we've always assumed. I mean, the Mishnah was almost explicit. This only applies to when there were two sets of two daughters. That when to say that all but the youngest or all but the oldest are forbidden. And this makes sense. If there was a middle daughter, at least the Mishnah should have said so. It didn't. It says it only talks about two groups of two daughters. Where it says if that's the case, the middle one in the first group, right? If there were three in the first group, the Vadai Sveika, she's definitely, she, in the case of older, she could be considered an older daughter in regard to the second group, right? Where all three of those from the first group are older than the second group. Basirle. But you're saying, and so she should be forbidden. Katanila. Does the Mishnah mention her? No, it doesn't mention her. So maybe the same applies for a potential third daughter in the second group. So where it says Hachiyashta, what are you talking about? Hasam Tana Katana Didali Surah. In the first group of daughters, so the Mishnah talks about the youngest of that group, that she is forbidden. That would apply to the middle one in that group, the older one, anyone who's older than her, right? So you didn't have to mention the middle daughter, but the second group, if there's this third daughter, I should have mentioned her. Okay, this is a little bit strange. Like, I don't know, to me, it's like the Mishnah is very clear, right? There were two groups of two daughters. So why are you trying to extend this to three daughters? I don't really get this. But it worms its way out of it anyway. Amar le Rav Huna bred Yehoshua Rava. Rav Huna said, "Ha Pesach dechikas achas dame." You wanted to compare the Mishnah and the Darim about making a vow until Pesach. It's similar to a case of having just one group of daughters, right? Where you can refer to the older, like it's more clear cut in the case of Pesach. Either Ad Pnei Pesach means the beginning or the end, right? It means one or the other. Uplige, but Rav Meir and Rav Yossi still disagree. Amalei, so he answers, Hasam Blishan the Alma Kamiflige. No, what they are arguing about there is not ambiguity. We're arguing about the meaning of the idiom, right? Marsavar ad pnei Pesach ad kamei Pesach. One says that this idiom ad pnei means until the beginning. Marsavar ad mifnei Pesach, and the other holds that it means till Pesach has passed, right? And using the interpreting the word pnei, meaning before or after, could be interpreted either way. That's why they're having their dispute there in Nadarim and not having anything to do with ambiguity. And we will stop here for today and pick it up tomorrow with this next Mishnah.
Yasher koach.
Okay.
Thank you, Dov. Thank you.
See you all tomorrow.